It started with the sound of wood splintering. The front door of my small, brick home shook violently as fists and boots slammed against it, and then, without warning, it flew open. Flashlights and voices poured into my living room. "You're in violation," one of them barked. My heart jumped into my throat. I wasn't looking at police officers. These weren't city cops. These were the so-called law enforcement patrols, a group of overzealous wannabe lawmen, drunk on the tiny bit of authority given to them by our neighborhood's homeowners association. I stood frozen as they stormed inside, hands on their belts, yelling about unauthorized modifications and fines past due. My crime: an old Harley-Davidson parked in my driveway, with a tarp over it. They claimed it disrupted the neighborhood aesthetic. My wife screamed from the kitchen, terrified, while my teenage daughter clutched her phone, recording the chaos. I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to swing, knowing that one wrong move would only make things worse. The men finally left, but not before handing me a paper notice crumpled against my chest. "Final warning," the leader sneered. My door hung off its hinges. My daughter cried silently, asking if we'd done something wrong. That question tore me apart inside. We hadn't, but we were being bullied, and bullies only stopped when someone stood up to them. That night, as I sat in the wreckage of my own home, I sent out one message to a group chat I hadn't touched in months: "Need the crew." My biker brothers and sisters weren't saints. We weren't outlaws either. We were a family, bound not by blood but by steel and loyalty. Years ago, we rode every weekend, raised money for vets, and helped rebuild homes after storms. But life had pulled us in different directions. Until tonight. One by one, my phone lit up with responses: "Where? When? We're in." 2 nights later, engines roared down my street. 20 motorcycles lined the curb, chrome glinting under streetlights. My daughter peeked from her window, eyes wide, not with fear this time, but with awe. The crew hugged me hard, slapped my back, and listened as I explained what had happened. Faces hardened. Nobody liked hearing about cowards abusing power. We rolled out together, the night air thick with the sound of thunder. Our destination: the HOA's so-called headquarters, a little office building they treated like a fortress, where they issued fines, threats, and smug letters that ruined lives. But tonight, they were going to get a taste of their own medicine. When we arrived, we didn't kick down doors. We didn't break anything. We parked our bikes in a perfect row right outside their building, the engines idling loud enough to shake the glass windows. One by one, we stepped off, boots hitting the pavement in unison. The crew stood shoulder to shoulder, leather jackets shining with patches earned over years of loyalty and respect. It wasn't violence we carried that night, it was presence. The HOA board members peeked through their blinds, pale as ghosts. Finally, the same man who had smashed my door came out, puffed up with false bravado. "You can't be here," he shouted. I stepped forward, staring him dead in the eye. "You came to my house. You scared my family. That ends tonight." He sputtered something about rules and violations, but his voice cracked under the weight of 20 riders glaring at him. My brothers and sisters didn't say a word. They didn't need to. Their silence was louder than engines. I held up my phone, my daughter's video of the raid playing on the screen. "This goes public tomorrow," I told him. "Your little patrol, your threats, the world will see what you really are." His face went pale. He knew the truth. Once the community saw this, their reign of intimidation would be over. By morning, the video had spread like wildfire. Neighbors who once felt powerless started speaking up, sharing their own stories of harassment and abuse. Families who had paid fines out of fear realized they weren't alone. The wall cracked from the inside, resignations piling up as their so-called cops scattered. It took weeks to rebuild my door and even longer for my wife and daughter to feel safe again. But something beautiful came out of the chaos. Our neighborhood found its voice. The biker crew stayed in touch, checking in often, riding through the streets as protectors instead of enforcers. My daughter stopped asking if we had done something wrong. She started asking if she could ride with me when she turned 18. That night, as I sat on my porch with my brothers and sisters, watching kids play safely on the sidewalks, I realized something: the world only changes when ordinary people stand together. You don't have to have a bike, a crew, or even a loud voice. You just have to decide that enough is enough. And when that day comes, when bullies kick down your door, you'll find strength you didn't know you had. Because family, by blood or by bond, will always answer the call. The fallout came faster than I expected. Within a week, the video had millions of views, and news vans started showing up outside our neighborhood. Neighbors who once whispered complaints about the HOA now spoke into microphones, their voices steady with anger. The HOA cops had turned into a national embarrassment. But people with power don't just give it up, they fight dirtier. It started with letters, thick envelopes shoved into my mailbox with threats of lawsuits. They claimed I had defamed the association, that I owed thousands in damages for tarnishing their reputation. When I laughed it off, they sent people to sit in cars across the street, watching my house late at night. My wife grew uneasy, double-checking the locks. My daughter stopped walking home alone. The HOA might have been losing the public battle, but in the shadows, they were still dangerous. One night, I came home from work to find my garage door spray painted in red, traitor. That was the breaking point. I picked up the phone and called the crew again. This time, I didn't just ask for backup, I asked for a plan. We met at a bar on the edge of town, a dim place with neon lights buzzing overhead. The crew gathered around a scarred wooden table. Tank, a mountain of a man with a beard down to his chest, slammed his fist down. These cowards think they can scare families. We need to hit them where it hurts, legally and financially. Raven, sharp-eyed and always the voice of reason, leaned in. Tank's right. They've got money, but they've also got skeletons. HOAs love power, but they hate exposure. If we dig, we'll find corruption, misused funds, shady contracts. We fight them with proof. I nodded. They smashed my door yelling, "Violation." Well, now it's time to show the world their violations. Over the next few weeks, the crew became something different, not just riders but investigators. Between shifts at work and late-night rides, we dug through public records, interviewed ex-members, and traced every dollar the HOA had collected. What we found was worse than any of us expected. Funds siphoned into private accounts, kickbacks from contractors, and bribes passed under the table. The real nail in the coffin. The HOA cops weren't even legally sanctioned. They were just hired security guards, men playing dress-up with badges ordered online. The night we uncovered it all, I looked around the table at my crew. Their eyes burned with the same fire I felt. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every neighbor, every family. Crushed under greed and intimidation. We decided to make our move at the next HOA board meeting, the one where they planned to vote on expelling my family from the neighborhood. That night, the community hall overflowed. Families packed the chairs, some standing against the walls. The board sat smugly at the front, trying to pretend they still had control. Then, the doors opened, and my crew walked in, 20 strong, leather jackets gleaming. Gasps filled the room. I stepped forward, papers in hand. You came to my home, you smashed my door, you tried to break my family. But tonight, I'm here with the truth. I laid the documents on the table, bank records, contracts, proof of corruption. Gasps turned into murmurs, murmurs into shouts. Neighbors who once bowed their heads in silence now stood tall, demanding answers. The board members paled, scrambling for excuses. But it was too late. The tide had turned. The same people they'd terrorized were now united, their voices louder than the board had ever imagined. By the end of the night, the board had no choice but to step down. The HOA cops scattered, their fake authority shattered. The community voted for a new beginning, a neighborhood run by its people, not by bullies hiding behind clipboards and threats. When it was over, my daughter hugged me tighter than she ever had before. "Dad," she whispered, "you didn't just fight for us, you fought for everyone." I looked around at the faces of neighbors, some smiling, some crying, all free for the first time in years. And behind me stood my crew, my family of steel and loyalty, the ones who answered the call when no one else would. The message was clear: power belongs to the people when they stand together. And as long as there are bullies in the world, there will be families, and crews, ready to rise. For a moment, it felt like peace had returned. The corrupt HOA board was gone, the fake HOA cops disbanded, and the community finally free to breathe. Families painted their fences without fear, kids played in driveways again, and the sound of motorcycles rumbling through the neighborhood wasn't a warning, it was reassurance. But power doesn't die quietly. 3 weeks after the board stepped down, I came home to find an unmarked black SUV parked across the street. Windows tinted, engine running. Inside, 2 men in suits stared at me before pulling away without a word. Something in my gut twisted. This wasn't over. That night, my phone rang from an unknown number. A cold voice spoke. "You embarrassed some very important people. That HOA was more than it seemed. Back off, or your family pays." The line went dead. I didn't sleep. My wife tried to reassure me, but the truth was clear. What we thought was just a corrupt HOA had ties to something bigger. Real estate developers, money launderers, maybe worse. The board members hadn't just been power-hungry neighbors, they were puppets for people who made fortunes squeezing communities dry. And I had just put their operation in the spotlight. The next morning, my crew showed up without me even calling. Tank slapped my shoulder. "We knew this wasn't done. Let's finish it." Raven leaned in, voice low. "If they're tied to developers, they'll make a move soon. Probably intimidation first, then something worse. We need to get ahead of it." Sure enough, the retaliation came fast. Cars vandalized, a neighbor's shed set on fire, anonymous threats shoved under doors. Fear started creeping back into the community. But this time, the people didn't scatter. They came to me, to my crew. "We're not letting them win," one neighbor said, fists clenched. That's when I realized, we weren't just fighting for ourselves anymore. We were protecting an entire neighborhood that had found its courage. The showdown came one Friday night. The same black SUVs rolled into our community center parking lot, headlights cutting through the dark. Men in suits stepped out, flanked by hired muscle. They thought fear would scatter us. Instead, they found the entire neighborhood waiting. Families, neighbors, and standing at the front, 20 bikers with engines rumbling like a storm. One of the suits sneered. "You think you've won. This land is ours. You'll never keep us out." I stepped forward, my crew behind me. "You don't own people. You don't own homes. You don't own this community." My voice echoed through the lot, louder than I thought possible. "You want a fight. You're outnumbered." Right then, the neighbors began stepping forward. One by one, mothers, fathers, teenagers, even the elderly. No one backed down. Some held cameras, others held signs, a few held baseball bats, but all of them stood together. The suits looked around, realizing what we had become. Not just bikers, not just neighbors, a united front. They backed into their SUVs, muttering threats, promising lawyers and courts. But the truth was written on their faces. They'd lost. Power only works when people bow to it. And we weren't bowing anymore. After they sped off, the neighborhood erupted in cheers. Kids hugged bikers, parents shook hands, and for the first time in years, laughter filled the streets at night. My wife stood beside me, her hand slipping into mine. My daughter looked up, eyes shining with pride. "Dad," she said softly, "we won." But I shook my head. "No, sweetheart, we won. All of us." The weeks that followed became something no one expected. The neighborhood formed its own council, neighbors volunteering, making decisions together, without fear or fines. The biker crew became guardians, riding through not as rebels but as protectors. And slowly, other neighborhoods began calling us, asking how we did it, how we stood up. I knew then that what started with a broken door had turned into something far bigger. A movement, proof that ordinary people, when they stand shoulder to shoulder, can topple giants. And as I rode with my crew down that quiet street, engines echoing through the night, I thought about those words that had once been shouted at me, "You're in violation." Maybe they were right. I was in violation of fear, in violation of silence, in violation of letting bullies win. And I wouldn't have it any other way. Months had passed since the showdown in the parking lot. The SUVs never came back. The old HOA office sat abandoned, its windows dusty, its sign half hanging, a relic of fear that no longer held weight. But the neighborhood was alive in a way it hadn't been in years. Kids chalked the sidewalks, families grilled together in front yards, and every Friday night, the community center lights burned bright with meetings, not of rules and fines, but of ideas and solutions. And through it all, my biker crew never left. We became a part of the fabric of the neighborhood. Tank taught kids how to fix bikes and engines. Raven started a women's self-defense class at the center. Even old Iron Mike, grumpy as he was, ended up teaching a bunch of teenagers how to rebuild a carburetor. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the houses gold, my daughter came to me with something I never expected. She held a notebook, pages filled with sketches of motorcycles, roads, and slogans. "What's this?" I asked, flipping through it. "It's an idea," she said shyly. "We should start something bigger. Not just here. A group that helps neighborhoods like ours stand up. You and your crew showed people what's possible. What if we made it a real movement?" Her words hit me harder than a punch. She wasn't that scared kid clutching her phone anymore. She was growing into someone brave, someone who wanted to carry the torch further than I ever dreamed. I brought it up at the next crew gathering. Tank nearly slammed his beer through the table. Hell yes. Imagine it. Chapters across towns, cities, all standing up for people getting pushed around. Raven smiled knowingly. It won't be easy. The bigger we get, the bigger the enemies we'll face. But maybe that's the point. And just like that, the idea became real. We started small. Rides into nearby towns, meetings with folks who had their own horror stories, helping rebuild communities strangled by red tape and corruption. Word spread fast. Our little crew was turning into something larger, something that couldn't be ignored. But with growth came pushback. Local politicians tried to paint us as a gang. Developers whispered that we were bad for business. Old enemies stirred, hoping to discredit us. Yet everywhere we went, people welcomed us. They didn't see criminals. They saw protectors. One night, after a long ride, I sat on my porch staring at the stars. My wife joined me, setting a hand on my shoulder. "You know," she said softly, "what started with a broken door, it changed everything. Not just for us, for everyone around us." I nodded slowly, watching as the faint glow of headlights signaled another crew rolling into town. New friends, new allies. "Yeah," I said, voice steady. "We didn't just break free of fear. We built something no one can take away." And then I realized, the fight was never about HOA, or even about my home. It was about freedom, about proving that when ordinary people refuse to bend, they become extraordinary. So now, when I ride with my crew and hear the thunder of engines behind me, I don't just hear noise. I hear a promise that no matter how big the enemy, no matter how loud the threats, there will always be people ready to stand together, ready to fight back. And as my daughter reminded me, sometimes the greatest revolutions start with the smallest violations. Fire that ties the series into a legacy chapter, where the fight grows into a movement, and the family bond between neighbors and bikers evolves into something unstoppable.